Movers of Reddit, what's the weirdest worst peculiar thing experience you've seen had in someone's home? I did this for a summer a number of years ago. And there was house one in particular that will always stand out. Family of 4. Normal looking people. 2-story single family home. No basement. Thought to myself, thank God. An easy gig today. Oh no. No. I was very wrong. We walk in and lots of stuff is already in boxes, thanks, and we're told to head to the kids' rooms first. 12-year-old kid who likes rocks. Really likes rocks. Like. Is obsessed with rocks. There are rocks everywhere in his room. Big ones. Small ones. Gravel. Sandstone. Bits of clay. Seashells. Bits of concrete. Asphalt. And a pile of what looked like bone fragments. He's a rock collector, mom says. No ducking kidding. There were so many rocks in the room that you couldn't only see narrow paths between the door, the bed, and the closet, which, indeed, was full of rocks. His sister's room was fine and mostly packed besides the furniture and the boxes full of belongings. The parents' room was similar. Everything normal and somewhat neatly packed. We shoveled the rocks into wagons to clear the room. Dad was upset that the shovels were going to stretch the carpet. Okay dude. We loaded several £100 of rocks into our truck that day. Business as usual after that. Felt odd that the family didn't seem to be bothered by it. They gave us each an extra £100 in cash for our troubles. Not really weird, but I moved a hoarder family once. They had a 2-story house that had a 1-foot deep layer of crusty clothes and garbage through all 2 floors in the basement. We brought snow shovels and shoveled it all into wardrobe boxes. The 2 teenage boys were there smoking pot and being generally in the way the whole 2 days it took us to shovel their shit into boxes. I found their bong collection and put it in a box labeled Christmas decorations. I spent one of my high school summers working for a guy who bought up a bunch of foreclosed McMansions in my area after the 2008 recession. Dude paid me great money under the table to clear them out. It was clear in most of them that the family's literally up and left, plates on the kitchen table, closets torn through while frantically packing. One got me particularly hard. It had a fully furnished basement playroom that was the stuff of dreams for a 6-12-year-old kid. Huge TV. A bunch of gaming systems. A Nerf gun arsenal. Super intricate Hot Wheels tracks. Etc. All of the toy cabinets had been dumped out and torn through, and there were a couple of bags of packed up toys left behind. I know a lot of these people made fast money through ethically questionable means. And spent it even faster, but the thought of an 8-year-old kid, no matter how privileged, having to pick the toys he could carry out of the insane dream playroom he will never see again kinda ducked me up. I worked as a mover for a few summers in college. And the worst one was this family of 4 that was moving from one unit in a complex to another unit in the same complex. My boss told me it should be a relatively easy move because the stuff wasn't going far and no stairs. We show up and walk into the apartment and it was a complete mess. The carpet was stained dark brown. The paint was peeling off the walls. There's crayon drawings all over the walls. And it smelt like absolute shit. It looked like no one had cleaned in years. We had to take constant breaks cause the air was just heavy with the stench of piss and shit. We finally get everything out. When the dad tells us there's one more room we need move. And need to be extra careful. He walks us to a door that had padlocks on it. And he opens it up. Inside are giant, intricately designed doll houses. These things were about 6 feet x 3 feet x 4 feet and had every tiny detail perfect. It was also the only room in the apartment that had clean carpet and didn't smell like hell. My company was working with a guy trying to develop a modern player piano. Before Sony basically mastered the technology. His house was full of antique music playing machines. One of them was a player violin. I can't remember exactly how it worked. But it had solenoids for finger positions and some complex mechanism for manipulating the bow. All kinds of interesting shit at that house. I work in mortgages and see lots of appraisals. I once saw a bedroom which was a shrine to Jennifer Aniston. There was a wall of framed photos of her in various poses. Candles, like Yankee candles, not religious ones, and a kneeler like a Catholic church. So weird. One lady had the word Jesus written on everything with what looked like permanent marker. I mean everything. The walls. The furniture. All the decor had the word Jesus on it. Couldn't get out of that house fast enough. When I was in high school, I used to work at the local recycling collection center. The guy who ran it had done too much acid. He only wore green. And he wrote Jesus on everything he owned. Too. Also, he was a 40-something-year-old guy. And lived in a 3-sided shed-like thing in his parents' backyard. Despite the fact that he hadn't spoken to them in 20+ years. And he refused to accept payment for his work. Because it was God's work. But otherwise, he was a chill boss. I wasn't a mover but doing demo work in New Orleans after Hurricane Katrina. It was in the old French Quarter. Not the touristy French Quarter. And it was an old home that had been abandoned and then squatted in. The place was beyond a wreck. It was more likely a biological hazard zone. Not just from the storm, but its inhabitants. The neighbor said they were there for at least 6 months. Inside there was mainly 3 things: a lot of women's clothing, creepy dolls made from said clothing, and piss jugs. Everywhere there were piss jugs, soda bottles, milk jugs, you name it. The smell still haunts me just thinking about it. Not a mover, but I used to work as a landscaper. About 10 years ago, we worked for this weird guy, rebuilding his terrace. I asked him if I could use his toilet. He said sure and showed me the way. This guy had a ducking huge photorealistic painting of himself in SS uniform standing next to Adolf Hitler. Foot on a Jew's skull. He bragged about it and how much it cost. etc. I'm pretty sure that's highly illegal in Germany. When I got back to work, I told my boss and my co-worker about it. The foreman's girlfriend is a Russian Jew. Long story short, we packed our sheet and the boss told him to get someone else. Edit. Fixed a typo. Moved a couple in their 60s who had 3 cats and 2 large African great parrots. All of these animals roamed freely in the house. And every surface in the house was coated in a thick layer of dust, bird and cat hair. I would estimate that the house hadn't been cleaned at all in about 5 years or more. The bedposts were caked in about a ½ inch of birded which ran from top to bottom. I assume the birds perched on top of the bedposts at night and sheet all down along them. The smell was ducking atrocious and the air felt thick and heavy inside the house. While packing up the master bedroom, I found thousands of Xanax pills. Like way more than a person would ever be prescribed by a doctor. The house also stank of weed up. Like they had been smoking indoors for years and never cracked a window. The husband was disabled and wore an adult diaper. And there was a very strong smell of sheet coming from him as he showed us around the house. Overall, a ducking bizarre and disgusting situation. When my mom died I went through her things. Her and my sisters weren't on speaking terms but I found photos of them and their children taken by private investigators in the different states they lived as well as info the investigators dug up like where they lived, where they worked, who they associated with. I was just shocked at the steps she took to know about their lives cause she had that "they're dead to me" attitude. I was also really sad that all of them let things get to that point. I found an old lady's past 80, she was in a nursing home. 6 toys and diary of her conquests from the 50s. She had an old dildo and a bunch of lingerie. The diary had details of all her hookups from the 50s I think. Things like BJS, maquillage sessions and screwing married guys. It was kind of sad. She was never married and didn't seem very happy in the text. I also felt bad about reading it. But I worked for the guy that found it and he read it aloud to the group during lunch. I also found a bunch of money that her dad hid in the basement. Coins from the 30s and 40s. This was a construction job in college. I used to do a lot of work remodeling old mansions in Shaker Heights, so It was always fun to find old bottles and cans of beer in some weird crawl space I was moving through. I wasn't legal to drink at the time, and I knew that teenagers 30 years ago tossed them in there after a party because I used to do the same thing at my parents' house. Not a mover, but I have a strange home story. I was invited to a house gathering once at someone's house who I just met that night. We are in our 20s, friend of friends. So not a total stranger, but did not know him well, so we walk into his place. It's an apartment in a building, and I get this eerie feeling like I am walking into the past, like into the 70s. When I say everything in this house was old to me, everything was old to me. 70s furniture, appliances, wall decorations, vases, curtains, and everything like had this yellow shade to it from being so old. Turns out that this apartment belonged to his grandpa, who lived there since the 60s until he died, and everything has literally remained exactly the same. Like it was frozen in time. Now this 20-year-old guy was living there. I ended up walking around and looking at every object in awe the entire time we were there. Also, no one seemed to find it as strange as I did, which was peculiar to me. Worked moving one summer. We were pulling a guy's entire life out of a giant mansion, and one of the items was the glass top to a dining room table that must have been 15 long. It got crated up and moved outside and leaned up against the truck. Somehow, it got knocked over, and we were all sure we were totally ducked and it would be shattered when we opened it up. The guy pretended to be super pissed at us until we finally unloaded it at the destination and yelled at us to open it up before we moved it inside. As soon as we cracked the crate, he started laughing his ass off. This Methodika's dining room table was custom built around the pane of bulletproof glass from a bank's drive-through window, which he'd purchased when the branch closed. It was completely fine, but certainly a 15x 4 feet piece of bulletproof glass was very peculiar. Not a mover, but I once helped a neighbor I barely knew move, who was separating from her husband. They were both present and they hadn't really worked out who was getting what in the split. He was staying in the house and she was leaving. Worst moving experience of my life. It's bad enough that they weren't packed, and we had to put things into boxes as we went. But she would tell us to put something in a box and then he would come and grab it from us and tell us it was his. So awkward. I used to clean out evictions for various landlords in Lansing, Michigan. It was an okay gig usually. Got to keep stuff we wanted to sell and got paid to move it. But one house was extremely depressing. It was a 2-story apartment with a basement, kids room, living room, adult bedroom, the works. But the basement was full of bottoms of pop cans that they were using to shoot up heroin. I know that because there was baggers and needles all over the floor. The worst part is they left all the kids' stuff behind. Only the living room and master bedroom were cleaned out. That made me really sad. Not a mover, a welder, but worked in lots of people's houses over the years. This one house had me thinking I was on Drew Gus. Alas, I was not. This lady was a granola in OJ. Went to put a handrail in. Walked in the house to be greeted by a wall of dolls. Just ducking dolls everywhere. Thought, well, that's weird, but whatever. Went into the next room. This is where things went from weird to WTF. The entire room was full of animals in glass containers. Not stuffed. Not mounted. Just dead. The first one that caught my eye was a squirrel in a giant light bulb. It was slumped over a stick and left to rot. That's it. No attempt to embalm. No attempt at any realism. Just haphazardly shoved into a giant light bulb to rot. And there was more. Lots more. All local animals, like she was going around picking up roadkill and shoving them into glass containers to watch as they decomposed. I was in that ducking room all day. All I could think was, I'll be in a big glass tube soon. That's how I'ma go. Not a car crash. Not cancer. I'm going to be this nut job's greatest art piece. Perfect. Not a mover, but I imagine I traumatized my mother. I packed up as much as I could in my sedan when moving. Left some things behind for my dad to bring me later. In one of the boxes was my dildo collection. I know my dad wouldn't dig through the boxes because he has a strong sense of privacy, thank God, but my mom has no doubt seen them and will never see me the same way again. Once helped a hoarder move who had 117 DVD players, 86 VHS players, and 18 of the exact same audio box portable VHS players. I counted. Maybe either a hoarder or he was trying to sell them for a profit, and it might have been illegal, depending on how long ago this occurred. Managed a moving company and occasionally worked on the truck. Moved this home that was actually pretty sad. This is all in Arizona where there's a big meth problem. Before I walked in I could smell they must have been cooking there. Guy, girl and a baby probably a year or two old. This place was filthy top to bottom and smelled the awful stench of meth and body odor. I was close to walking off the job, it was so bad. We moved them to much nicer neighborhood and their credit card processed. Which I didn't think it would. So convinced myself that they were trying to get out of a bad situation and be better parents. I did an estimate and this average looking male in his 50s had his toenails painted a sky blue. Cool guy but only had a son and no grandkids. So I was real curious. Moved a high-end home and found a safe with about 20 pounds of weed up. Guy was part owner of a dealership. At the end he tipped me double. $200. He knew I saw and I didn't say anything, so maybe that's why the heavy tip. Moved a spoiled BT kid whose mother paid for it. Place was a mess and found multiple used condoms under his bed. I'm sure I've got a couple in memory that I can't recall. Most of the stories are more like, well, then the couch had to go upside down off the balcony. It was stupid. Most of moving is stupid. A cat inside a couch. Had to cut the couch open to retrieve said cat. Was dumb. A hunk of cat poop stuck to a dresser. Hanging from this poop was a rather large thong. Many boxes of dildos. Tripped over one. Crazy people screaming at us all day. Any movers out there can confirm that this just happens sometimes. But this lady was a particularly exceptional piece of work. She also, literally and with her foot, kicked her assistant out of her house that day. 15 years as a paramedic. I saw many very strange sights. But the gentleman with his manhood jammed in a Hoover, vacuum cleaner, pipe was the hardest to maintain a straight face. The fire brigade cut the pipe so we could transport to the casualty ER. However, my colleague, a female paramedic, came up with the idea of squeezing a lubricating jelly down the pipe, which finally eased the said appendage out. She even gave the bandage a nice neat bow. Then I cracked up. I worked as a mover with friends for a summer job while in college, and there is definitely a horror story which sticks out in my mind. I show up as relief help to a crew which had already been at a house for 7 hours, and as I arrived I was greeted with wide stares of the "you aren't going to believe this" variety from. The boys tell me to check out the basement. I got about 4 steps down the stairs before I was punched by the most pungent sour smell that I couldn't quite put my finger on. I buried my face in my shirt and took another couple and sure steps down the stairs to where I see a chest-high shelf which runs around the whole room. The shelf is covered with bottles containing varying amounts of liquid. What was in the bottles? Piss. So many bottles of piss. There was an old beat-up chair and a TV with an Xbox surrounded by more bottles of piss. So much piss. I immediately left the job site, but that visual and smell is seared into my memory forever. Duck. So much piss. They also found a dead cat behind the couch later. So I guess I didn't have it too bad. Not a mover, but had people help my family move once when I was a kid. My dad used to use his old underwear to clean the car, and he would keep them in the garage. When we had people helping us move, I remember seeing one of the guys pick up one of my dad's pairs of old underwear, and freaked out when he realized what it was. I'm not sure if that was the weirdest thing he ever saw when helping somebody move, but that was probably up there. Was a mover for about 4 years. Seniors have the weird sheet. Moved one who had over $10,000 in $100 bills between his mattress and box spring. Gave me a $100 tip lol. Also moved some seniors who had a giant real-life taxidermied giraffe from Africa in their home. I didn't actually see it because it was all crated up, but it was neat. Lots of Viagra pills under beds. 6 toys. Most people were good about it and packed that stuff themselves, but not always.